So my name is Patrice Koelsch, and I am substituting for Shelley Graff tonight, and they are on, they're actually leading a retreat. I believe it's at Cloud Mountain, and I've been a member of this community since 1994, and I've been a teacher here and a couple of other places, including a long-term commitment to teaching or offering meditation to incarcerated persons. And that has had a really salutary effect on my practice to see people in difficult, really difficult circumstances trying to live the noble life that the Buddha talked about. Live with some equanimity, with some graciousness, kindness, and in those sorts of circumstances, even small acts of kindness are really amplified. So that's been an important part of my practice for the last 2 decades. Before we begin tonight, I want to do a land acknowledgement. And this can feel really sort of just performative, but I think it's really important. And I was so moved 2 weeks ago when I was at the Aurora preseason women's soccer game, and they did the Star Spangled Banner. Then they did a land acknowledgement, and then they said, and now we are going to take a moment, not a moment, a minute, a full minute, to stand in silence and reflect on what this means. And it was just really moving to me to invite several hundred people who were there to have a good time at a soccer game to remember whose land this is that we are all on. So, do I turn it up here, or can you turn it up inside? I can put the mic closer. Let's see if this is going to work. Is this any better? Not quite. No, not really. Can you bring the sound up at all? All right, let's find that. Is this better? Okay. All right. Thank you. Thank you so much for asking. So common ground is sited on the traditional, ancestral, and contemporary homeland of the Dakota people. This land holds great historical, spiritual, and personal significance to its original inhabitants and their descendants who live here today, and to their future generations. We acknowledge the sovereignty of Native nations and our obligations to live up to treaty agreements. It is our intention to rectify the harms that we have committed and those we continue to commit. This land acknowledgement is only one small part of supporting Indigenous communities. It is our hope that our land acknowledgement statement will inspire others to stand with us in solidarity with Native nations and to amplify the voices of Indigenous people leading grassroots change movements. So we are on land that is very, very close to the most sacred of all the Dakota sites, the Bdote, which is at the confluence of the Mississippi and Minnesota rivers. And that's where the Dakota believed that the first people emerged from the earth. And for centuries, Dakota women would go and have their babies at the Bdote so that their children would see the first light that the first people saw. So it is an incredibly sacred site, and it is right near at the end of Pike Island and at the base of Pike Island, right at Fort Snelling, was the concentration camp where more than 1,600 elderly men, women, and children spent the winter of 1862-63. So we live on land that is full of significance in so many ways. So, and we have this beautiful site here, and I hope that honors the respect that people have had for these lands. So, as always, we'll begin with a 30-minute mindfulness meditation. I'll do a little guiding at the beginning, and then we'll be in silence. So please make yourself comfortable. And this is not the Breath Olympics. It's not to see who can stay the stillest. Stillness is a good thing when it's supportive. But when I first started here at Common Ground, I remember Mark saying in the very first meditation class that I was at, he said, we ask people to sort of be still and be quiet, he said, but if you need to move, just move mindfully. We're here to alleviate suffering, not to add to it. And that's when I really knew that I'd found the practice that was right for me. So I encourage you to sit with that sense of you really belong here right now. This is the right place for you to be, however it is that you are. And as we sit here together, we can begin by just appreciating the support that we give to and get from each other when we come together to sit. Just appreciating the goodness of that. Being with like-intentioned people, people committed to non-harming, people committed to opening their hearts and their minds. So appreciating what I hope is a relatively safe space for all of us right now. And mindfulness is primarily about appreciating what's happening in the present moment, awareness of the present moment's experience, letting go of judgment as best we can, letting go of story, and just being with how things are. So it's really helpful to let go of any fixed idea of what a good meditation is, what a good meditator does, and just relax into the present moment. Letting your awareness be with how things are right now. And we can do that by beginning with the body, letting the attention gently come into the body, just how it is right now, with this attitude of curiosity and friendliness and kindliness. We just let our attention be with the body. And experiencing this very body in this moment. letting ourselves be embodied. And just noticing any sensations, letting our awareness be with the body. And then we can gently bring this same kindly, curious, friendly attitude to be with the mind, however the mind is right now. It might be restless, it might be dull, maybe bright. Just bringing a kindly curiosity to how is this mind right now? And then once we've made friends with our body and our mind, we can just let ourselves be with a kind of open awareness, awareness to the present moment's experience. Just noticing what arises, what passes away. And if it's helpful to use the breath as a support for staying with the present moment, that's perfectly fine. What we don't want to do when we do our practice is to strive to try to get somewhere, get something. We can see if we can relax and actually enjoy our practice. Just allowing ourselves to be with awareness of how things are right now. Sensations, perceptions, even thoughts. Sometimes even a little earworm makes its appearance, and you have some song going on, some jingle. Just letting that have space and just relating to it with this sort of kindly curiosity. Oh, this is how it is right now. This is what the present moment is like. And so we'll practice in silence for a while. And for the last few minutes of our meditation, I would just invite you to see if in the present moment there is any slight flavor of gratitude or appreciation. This isn't something you have to fabricate, but I often notice that when I pay attention, there's just this sort of mood of gratitude or appreciation. And so you just might want to be open to that as a possibility. So as always, you're welcome to get up, stretch, say hello to one another. And people on Zoom, I would encourage you to give your eyes a little break, look at something a little more distant than your screen, maybe stretch a little bit. Is there anyone here for the first time tonight? In the room or on Zoom? Anyone on Zoom? Okay. this evening I thought I would reflect on suffering and equanimity. And I want to also, in our time tonight, acknowledge that this is the 5th anniversary of the murder of George Floyd, something that's really, really significant in all of our lives. I'm going to begin by continuing some of the discussion that Shelley has offered in these past few weeks, talking about dukkha and upekkha, suffering and equanimity. And the mindful exploration of suffering and the nuanced and expansive understanding of equanimity have really been especially pertinent to me as I observe this 5th anniversary of the murder of George Floyd. And that anniversary is actually this Sunday, May 25th. And I've been reflecting on how has my understanding and practice of the Dharma grown and deepened in the past 5 years. And how has my understanding of our connectedness, our interdependence, deepened as a member of this Sangha, this community, and as a citizen in this world. So our framework is to look at dukkha initially, and remember that etymologically, I believe Shelley brought this out, etymologically, dukkha comes from the idea of the hub of a wheel that doesn't really fit the axle. So there's a kind of misalignment between the wheel and the axle. So it's kind of ka-thunk, ka-thunk, ka-thunk. And if we take that as a notion, dukkha is often just translated as suffering. And that's one meaning of it, but it is a much more nuanced concept. We also have it translated as unsatisfactory, dis-ease, santikaro, some of you have studied with here, and some other translators regard it as that which is hard to bear. I think that's a wonderful translation that we understand dukkha as suffering, is that which is hard to bear. I recently, a couple of months ago, heard Joseph Goldstein say these days dukkha is for him mostly the inevitability of unwanted experience. So, and I mostly think of it as what happens when I'm really out of alignment with the way things really are, a kind of resistance to reality, wanting things to be other than they are, clinging to that wanting in a way that really keeps me stuck. That just that sense, it shouldn't be this way, you know, that kind of, the sort of thing that, you know, is the kind of small child's tantrum. It shouldn't be this way. It's not fair. And really hanging on to that clinging. Many years ago, like in the 90s, I was in a women's process group, and one of the women in the group said to me, Patrice, I'm talking about my significant other, she said, you know, you knew him before you married him. You've been married to him for a while. And before you married him, he had spots. When you married him, he still had spots, and he still has spots now. And what I've heard you say year after year after year is, I want him to have stripes. I want him to have stripes. And I was really clarifying for me. You know, it is that sort of wanting things to be other than they are. Shinzen Young, who taught back here in the Twin Cities in the 80s, and he says, suffering is pain multiplied by resistance. Suffering is pain multiplied by resistance. And we can be sad, and we can even be brokenhearted without feeding the suffering that is clinging to a distorted view. It's not that, you know, we will never be sad. We will never, I mean, there are lots of things to be really brokenhearted about in this world and sad in this world. But if that comes from a distorted view, it shouldn't be this way. It can't be this way. That's a kind of suffering. But the sadness that is the acceptance of, okay, this is the way things are, really sad. And in the past 2 weeks, 2 friends of mine have both gotten really grim diagnoses. And in each case, it's like, okay, this is how it is right now. And for me as a friend, it's really sad. It's really sad. But I'm not suffering in that sense of clinging that this shouldn't have happened. These are people who really took care of them. You know, the sorts of things that people often say, why did this happen to me? I've always lived such a healthy lifestyle. I've taken care of, you know, the way I eat. But no, this is the way things are. So it's not that we aren't sad, we aren't heartbroken. It's that we don't suffer because we're clinging to wanting things to be other than they are. And upekkha, which is usually translated as equanimity, literally means to look over. Equanimity is the clearly seen big picture, both in time and in space. It's about perspective. It's about having the perspective that impermanence, change, is a constant on a macro level and a micro level. Everything is always in flux. And many of you know who have studied the Brahma Viharas that in the Brahma Viharas there's always like a near enemy and a far enemy. The near enemy is something that looks sort of like it. It's kind of in camouflage so it can get really close. The far enemy is what we can see way off because it's the opposite. So with equanimity, the far enemy is reactivity and overwhelm. That would be the opposite of equanimity. And the near enemy is indifference. And it's not that, and I always want to make this clear, when we are overwhelmed, and sometimes we all are, the move is not to castigate ourselves for not being equanimous. The skillful move is to practice self-compassion. So sometimes people are under the impression that if they are reactive or overwhelmed with the enormity of circumstances, that they're sort of really bad practitioners, that they're not being skillful. The skillful move, when you're overwhelmed, when you just find yourself being reactive, is to move to self-compassion. Equanimity is accepting our embodied vulnerability, our fragility, our bodily fragility, our mortality. And dukkha results from our strategies to deny this. The strategy of saying, this can't happen to me, you know, just really being in a state of denial. Jill Shepherd, who is a Dharma teacher that I've never met in person, but I've listened to her talks a lot on Dharma Seed. She teaches in New Zealand. And she says that equanimity is the hinge between wisdom and compassion. And I think that's a beautiful way to understand it. It's what connects wisdom and compassion. Other times it's described as the ballast that enables a kind of steadiness, that is the, sometimes we say it's not falling into extremes is another way people talk about equanimity, that equanimity keeps us from being in any sort of extreme. The Buddha talked about, not the extremity of indulgence, not the extremity of, that sort of complete austerity, but we look for sort of being in the middle way. And Zohar Levi, I believe is Israeli, talks about equanimity is the ability to be equally close to all things, to be able to take everything in and look at it equally closely. So cultivating equanimity is a cultivation of mindfulness. In a lot of ways, equanimity is really supported by our mindfulness about seeing clearly, seeing the big picture, understanding impermanence, understanding the constancy of change, being willing to see that clearly. And that really keeps us balanced in a way. Another image that's sometimes used for equanimity is that it's like bamboo, which is very, very strong, but is able to bend in the wind. It can be very flexible. So cultivating equanimity is a cultivation of mindful, appropriate response. And there's actually a methodology for cultivating this appropriate response. There's one of the Zen sayings is, so what is the main teaching of Zen practice? And the answer is appropriate response. So we can think about equanimity as the cultivation of appropriate response. And there's a kind of interesting methodology for this that is called the peacemaker tenets that some of you may have heard of before. That was developed by Roshi Bernie Glassman, who would take people on retreat to Auschwitz, and they'd sit for hours on the platform, and he'd take them on street retreats, and it was about really learning to be equanimous. And the peacemaker tenets, the first one is to start from a place of not knowing. And by that, what's meant is really letting go of assumptions, letting go of preconceptions, coming into a situation with a really open heart and mind, not with an agenda. And the second step in this methodology is bearing witness. And that really is mindfulness and equanimity, about really paying attention. What's happening right now? What am I really seeing? Just bearing witness, and especially around suffering, to really bear witness to that suffering, to see it clearly, to see what's happening. And then out of that comes the third step, which is taking compassionate action. And sometimes compassionate action is very subtle. I read an article by two bioethicists who talked about sometimes in their experiences as doctors, they would be in the neonate wards, and there would be these situations where there was no desirable outcome. No possible outcome was a desirable outcome. These sort of tragic situations. And they said that the most important thing in those situations was not to abandon the parents and not to abandon the patient. And this idea about not abandoning, that may be the compassionate action that might be the skillful action, just showing up. And they said, in every situation that's really awful, there's almost always something you can do that makes it less awful. And a lot of that is showing up, being completely present, being completely there for people who are in extreme distress. Roshi Joan Halifax recently said in a Dharma talk about action, she said, from a Buddhist point of view, solidarity is expressed through mutual support, through shared responsibility. We emphasize the experience of interconnectedness, of cause and effect, and how important it is to actively address suffering and work toward not just our own personal well-being, but literally collective well-being. And some of you may have heard me say in previous Dharma talks that I believe the defining characteristic of our species, Homo sapiens, is our tremendous capacity for care. I think that's what really distinguishes us. I mean, there are other species that are really pro-social, that they care for their offspring, they care for their relatives, they care for their group. We probably even have seen those cases of, cross-species friendship, the donkey and the rooster, or all these, there are lots of instances of care in other animals. But we humans, as far as we know, are the only ones who care about beings we don't know, and even beings that do not yet exist. We care about future beings. We have this tremendous capacity for care. And because of this capacity to care, and because of our Buddhist aspiration not to harm ourselves or others, the murder of George Floyd here in our city, in the middle of an afternoon, without cause, by the people who took an oath to protect us, and did this despite many bystanders begging them to stop. This was experienced as moral injury by many, many of us. And moral injury is a very real thing. And it occurs when people are harmed by being implicit with a situation that compromises their values or beliefs, by being witness to morally repugnant behavior, or by being the victims of someone else's transgressions. I mean, this was mostly studied after Vietnam, when persons came back, soldiers came back, who had done things that were inconceivable to them before they went, and they really suffered a tremendous moral injury. But moral injury also happens to bystanders. It happens if you work at a place that is, sometimes in healthcare situations, people will say that the staff suffers moral injury when they're so overworked and they can't give the patients the sort of care that they think the patients deserve. So it's a very real phenomena. And though there have been many efforts by individuals and groups to come to a racial reckoning and to get at the roots of our national wound, that began with the arrival of enslaved people in 1619 and the ongoing genocide of the indigenous people, we find ourselves now, 5 years later, after the murder and the uprising, we're now bystanders to daily bombings of Palestinian civilians, bombing is happening with the assistance, military assistance provided by our country and our tax dollars. And here at home, we're seeing non-citizens being kidnapped and deported, humanitarian aid being abandoned, and dissent punished. So I think the moral injury that many of us are suffering right now is acute. And here's where our mindfulness practice and our cultivation of equanimity can be the foundation for turning toward the pain of the moral injury rather than shutting down or turning away. In the inner work of racial justice, Rhonda McGee asks, how might our desire for liberation and healing depend on our taking action now? And that's something I've thought about quite a bit. How might our desire for liberation and healing depend on our taking action now? In this wonderful book that many of us at Common Ground, a lot of the teachers are now reading, called Fierce Vulnerability by Kazu Haga. It's Healing from Trauma Emerging from Collapse. I'm going to read a rather lengthy section that I think is really pertinent. Kazu writes, while I emphasize the importance of spiritual practice, I sometimes find myself disheartened at the lack of fierceness I feel in many spiritual spaces. Often I experience communities engaging in spiritual practices in ways that don't have an analysis of collective liberation and systemic change. Many people, for example, pay thousands of dollars to attend fancy retreats that focus only on their own healing. The multi-billion-dollar wellness industry, which touts the benefits of meditation, yoga, and vegan, raw, macrobiotic, whatever diets, puts the emphasis on the individual. The message is, if you meditate enough, exercise, and eat a healthy diet, you will be healthy and happy. An analysis of broader systemic factors at the root of disease and depression is notably absent. This industry does not challenge the status quo. The wellness industry and all its pseudo-spiritual apps and self-help retreats are part of the status quo. This cannot be where we stop. Healing and spiritual practice aren't individual practices. They're relational, collective experiences. If spiritual practice is about understanding we are part of something bigger, it is impossible to practice solely at the individual level. If you're truly deepening into a worldview of interdependence, it's only natural to work for the liberation of others who are suffering. I'm afraid many communities use spiritual practices as a form of spiritual bypassing, convincing themselves that they are healing and becoming more enlightened while ignoring the hard work of looking at their own shadows and understanding our complicity in systems of violence. Practices like meditation and yoga can help us overcome stress and anxiety, which is always a good thing. However, the danger is that these practices teach people to be complacent about injustice. Accepting reality doesn't mean being complacent about it. Acceptance can be the foundation of seeing clearly and lead to dedicated, unwavering engagement with injustice. There is a world of difference between accepting the reality of our world and committing to changing it, or accepting the reality of our world and using spiritual practice to make our complicity with it a little easier to live with. Read that sentence again, because I think this is really important. There's a world of difference between accepting the reality of our world and committing to changing it, or accepting the reality of our world and using spiritual practice to make our complicity with it a little easier to live with. Practices used to decompress from the stresses of living in a capitalist economy so you can go back into it and continue to earn wealth from a system that causes so much harm aren't liberatory for you and for anyone else. And then Kazu says, we're all doing the best we can, and I don't want to shame anybody for their practices. I simply see the crisis we're in and know that collectively we need to be doing so much more, myself included. So seeing clearly how things are, not denying or resisting the enormous vulnerability of our collective well-being, but engaging from a place of equanimity, that hinge that connects wisdom and compassion. For me, that's the practice that best honors the anniversary of George Floyd's murder and the uprising, and connects me to the great work of healing ourselves and our nation. And this is another quote from Roshi Halifax. When we look deeply, we can see that the history of social movements, of enduring social change, is not the work of a single individual, but of communities living the narrative of connection, of interbeing, of ethical, courageous, and caring solidarity. Interconnected communities dedicated to the well-being of all. And that's what we hope our Sangha is. So I want to offer an equanimity practice that I use. And the equanimity practice or compassion practice are generally phrases that we recite and connect with deeply. And this is a practice for me that has been most helpful. And the practice is, each of us is the inheritor of our past action, the owner of our present actions, and the fabricator of our future actions. Though I care about you and wish you well in every way, I can only be responsible for my own choices. Each of us must undertake our own journey. I'll read that again. Each of us is the inheritor of our past actions, the owner of our present actions, and the fabricator of our future actions. Though I care about you and wish you well in every way, I can only be responsible for my own choices. Each of us must undertake our own journey. Now, this is not to say that we can't support and encourage each other on our journeys, but it is really that understanding that no matter how much we love a person, no matter how much we care for a person, we don't control another person. Persons are responsible for making their own choices, and their own choices are a consequence in part of past actions and present choices. So we can have a lot of compassion as we do this, and a lot of care in our equanimity practice. But it is a practice of deeply understanding that we are primarily responsible for our own intentional actions. And again, it's not to say that we can't support, encourage, be with other persons, but we are not responsible for the choices that other persons make. Kazu says, our work is to go to the places where harm and destruction are happening, to face injustice head on, and to be reminded that affirming life, creating beauty, and centering relationship is possible even in the midst of social and ecological collapse. I'll read that again. So our work is to go to the places where harm and destruction are happening, to face injustice head on, and to be reminders that affirming life, creating beauty, and centering relationship is possible even in the midst of social and ecological collapse. So that's our charge. And I offer this in remembrance of George Floyd. So thank you for your kind attention. And we have quite a bit of time for people to respond, ask questions, maybe talk a little bit about your own experience in processing this anniversary, of what that might mean. Let me take a minute, breathe. And really allow yourself to feel the weight of 5 years passing, of so much suffering, of some hopes raised and dashed, and to take to heart this idea that our work is to go to the difficult places. And it's also to have joy in our lives, to have creativity, to celebrate beauty, to nurture relationships, to be in connection. That our mindfulness and our equanimity allow us to do that. To be with the brokenhearted, to be with the sad, the tragic, and to still see what's beautiful, to really nurture relationships, to really and exploit this tremendous capacity for care. And Mary, did you want to say something? We've got a mic, don't we?
I think of that 14-year-old young woman who videoed on her phone.
It would be helpful to use the mic because of folks on Zoom, please.
Hi, my name is Cindy. I think of that 14-year-old young woman who videoed the whole thing for George Floyd, and what she must be. I mean, I've heard her interviewed a couple of times, and I mean, every year it comes around, and she must be thinking of watching that horrible thing that happened. And I live not far from there, and I think about it every time I go near that intersection, and wonder, how the people around there feel. So.
Well, I'll share with you the compassion. When something like that comes up for me, the compassion practice that I have found really helpful. Again, it's like a little prayer. I believe this is attributed to Jack Kornfield, and it's, may you be held in great compassion. May your pain and suffering be eased. May you live with a wise and peaceful heart. May you be held in great compassion. May your pain and suffering be eased. May you live with a wise and peaceful heart. And for me, that really encapsulates the aspiration that I have when I'm with people who are suffering, who are in pain and distress. And to sort of have that in our pockets, in a way, to know that, oh, this is my aspiration for this person, for that young woman, for all of us, to be held in compassion and to have our pain and our suffering be eased, and to live with a wise and peaceful heart. Anyone on Zoom like to raise a hand? Not now. other responses that people have. Even responses, just how are you feeling? Oh, I'm sorry. There we go.
Hey, I'm Emily. I use she, her pronouns. It's interesting, I'm reading a book that's Your Heart Was Made for This. I think it's Jay often Soffer. I can't remember. There's
Oren
three
J.
names.
Sofer.
Yes, there we go. I was like, it's three names and I mix them up every time. But the book is like looking kind of in a similar way to what you were reading about, kind of like different qualities or different like ways of being in the time of crisis. And the chapter that I just read was on integrity. And it's interesting. It really is like, I'm seeing a lot of like, there's this theme, with equanimity, with the way that integrity was presented, like showing up. And I think one thing I was drawn to in that chapter that I'm really drawn to in you speaking today is really the being open, the feeling into, the I guess for me, it keeps being like the not denying, the really being present with, and so I think like in this chapter and in they were talking about an integrity, the idea is this, the powerfulness that can come from really feeling into a moment or really feeling into an experience as opposed to instantly reacting, right? And so I think there's something that I'm sitting with even after you spoke, when you were like, let's just breathe, let's just like be with this, that I think is really important about, for me, along with equanimity, along with like reflecting on this anniversary. It's the really like not rushing into, like not just rushing past, or like it's that really being with and really noticing, that I think is really important. So I guess that's what's coming up for me.
No, thank you, Emily. That's a very helpful perspective. We don't have to have an opinion about it or a position. If we can just feel, and the feeling might be a feeling of confusion in a way, of a lot of different emotions, a lot of different thoughts. And I'm glad you pointed that out, because there is often that sense that we need to be able to articulate clearly. And sometimes there are things that are beyond articulation or not ready to be articulated. It's okay to spend time incubating what's going on and not having to come up with a position or an opinion or a take on something. And that's kind of against the stream in the way we're encouraged to live our lives, which is often placing a value on right away having a reaction, an opinion, a take, and then we end up often being sort of stuck with something that wasn't especially well thought out, but once we've said it, it's ours and we have to kind of defend it. So it is really worthwhile to be able to take some time and just mull over, be with. If Shelley were here, I think they might say, be with it in the body. What's the body knowing right now? Be with it in the body. How does it feel in the body? And letting that be enough. Not having to rush something. So I hope that didn't just shut everyone down. No. No one can say anything now. Oh, on Zoom. Just a sec.
Can you hear me?
Now I can.
Okay. Thank you. I think your talk was great. It really was helpful. And I was thinking before I came tonight, I was listening to the news on PBS. And as different people were being interviewed or we were talking about the administration, they were talking about the administration, noticing the aversion that was coming up in me with each person. And just because I have this attitude, right? And so, but it really got me going because I was feeling so uncomfortable with I'm not going to call it hatred. It's just that, oh, here we go again, that kind of an attitude without being the least bit open-minded to what I was hearing. And so I, out of curiosity, started listening to a couple of what the people were saying. And these, of course, are picked by Trump, these people. And I'm going, well, I need to listen to this perspective because there's always two sides to everything, right? I mean, there's something about it that's good. There's something about it that's bad in my perspective. But the thing is, there's something to be heard because I don't really truly believe that people are out to harm other people. They're just probably doing what they think is the best thing to do. And I'd like to think that. But it was just really noticing, not being open-minded to hearing what somebody else has to say. And if I close down, I can't have compassion. I can't have any of those things. It's like you said, being a little curious about it. But it also changed my attitude about it. And and I think that it's learning how to deal with what I don't like and what I'm pushing away. And if I'm not curious about that, then I don't know where else I can go, to do something about the way I'm thinking about them or have compassion for people because we're all suffering and we all have the same things in us. We're people and we just do this. But it was really helpful for me to watch that tonight. And then your talk really amplified what my own way of dealing with it. So that's what I have. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Being curious, being willing to listen is an amazing. It's such a gift when we can listen, truly listen to other people, when we can really hear it. And one of the things that is helpful to me, I practice listening to people, is in nonviolent communication. One of the questions I always ask is, what is the need that's being expressed here? What is the need underneath what's being said? And that's a very compassionate way of listening sometimes to people who may hold opinions or may say things that are that we don't agree with, and really trying to understand, like, well, what's going on here? What is this person needing? And a lot of times, people are needing not to feel judged, that their kind of defensiveness, what may come across as arrogance. So making that effort to listen to people, and as you pointed out, noticing your own aversion. I mean, that's kind of the start, like, oh yeah, this is how the mind is. And can I be curious about what's being said? Can I try to see what's underneath this. And it's not that you have to agree with that person, but it really helps to understand, that person may be very insecure. That person may be, feeling judged all the time, feeling disrespected. I read somewhere that a mediator said that one of the things that is often at the kind of the core of even nations coming into conflict is that one party will feel disrespected. One party will feel that they're being treated without respect. And that is such a tender spot for so many of us. It is so damaging when we are not treated with dignity and treated with respect. And so sometimes when I listen to persons that I don't agree with, I think, well, maybe their core wound is that they have not felt respected, and that's why they're so aggressive, maybe. But if we really come to it with an open mind, that really helps. Anything else anyone would like to offer? Well, oh, good.
Hi, I'm Annika, she, her. I thought the passage you read was really interesting about kind of the balance of either using spiritual practice, how that can either kind of lead us and motivate us to work towards a better world, or, it historically has been also used as a system of complacency. I thought that was really interesting. And for me, I was thinking about how I feel like I spend so much time outside of my body, especially lately. I've just really been feeling kind of disconnected from myself and from my body. And I think that in spaces like this, during meditation or during yoga, when I really can get back into my body and back into my senses and feel everything, and like in reflecting on George Floyd, I think, as you were also sharing, like that is so important to have that space to just feel everything. And like we need that right now, because like the last thing we need is to continue to walk around feeling numb. And I think I felt very numb the last 5 years in reflecting back. And I think I am my best self when, I sit with those feelings and then let that hurt and that heartbreak motivate me to take action. And so I think that is the beauty of spiritual practices, is it brings us back into our senses and into those feelings, and then we can act on those out of love.
Thank you. All for spiritual practices. And I want to let people know about something that is going to be happening and that I would encourage you to consider participating in. It's called Cutting Through the Noise. And there was a sort of pilot done this last fall that I participated in. And this is something that's going to be on Saturdays, every Saturday from June 7th to July 12th, from 10:30 to 11:30 at George Floyd Square. And it's at the People Station there. And the announcement is, in a world rife with systemic injustice, cutting through the noise has never been more critical. Let us come together with a commitment to justice to embody peace and bear witness in shared public places. Each week, a facilitator representing a unique religious or non-religious perspective will provide reflections on the value of collective, quiet spiritual practice as a means to counter violence and oppression. Attendees will be invited to pray, reflect, meditate according to their own faith tradition, or simply rest in the sights, sounds, and feelings of the present moment. People of all and no faiths invited to participate. With a hope for deepening wellness, the 6-week series will introduce and practice retreat in real time and space, right where we are. Reverend Dr. Gia Starr Brown and Reverend Ben Connolly are the facilitators. Weekly guest presenters include Reverend Terry Berner, Amira Khan, Reverend John Lee, and Chris Stedman, representing a diverse array of religious and non-religious perspectives. And Ben Connolly, some of you may know, is a Soto Zen priest at Minnesota Zen Center, and he has been the instigator of many, many, many social justice actions. And he was the person, some of you may remember, sitting in his robes as the 3rd precinct burned. And so anyway, there was an effort last fall to do this, and it was on a Tuesday. And you sit for about 30 minutes in kind of benches in the people's space there. And someone gives a slight guided meditation, and then people sort of talk about what their experience was. And last year there were maybe 8 to 12 people each time, but they're hoping that there might be more people. And it's, sometimes people like had arguments, right? There are a bunch of people sitting, and there were some people arguing about something, and there was traffic, and there was noise, and it was a really embodied experience. So I put a copy of this downstairs on the bulletin board where there are some community events noted, and would really encourage you to think about showing up. It's only an hour on Saturdays, and it's a really worthwhile experience. So with that, I will offer the merit, and then I know you may have some announcements. Okay. Okay, so I love sharing the merit. It gives us such a chance to practice imaginative generosity. If there's any goodness to our practice, any benefit or merit or blessing, we would happily, gladly, joyfully share it with others. In fact, if we could, we would give it away, every bit of it. We would share any blessings, any merit with our teachers, our parents, our families, our friends, our community. We would share any goodness with the people we know and the people we don't know, with the people we like, the people we don't like so much. And in addition to all the two-leggeds, we would share any blessings, any goodness with the four-leggeds, the many-leggeds, the winged, the scaly, the slimy, and the finny. May all beings find a path to peace. May all beings be free from suffering. And Eric, you'd like to make some announcements?
Yes. Thank you so much for the teachings tonight, Patrice. A reminder that all that we do here at Common Ground is freely given in the spirit of Dana. And if the spirit moves you to give back, there are all sorts of different ways to do that, monetarily, volunteering, et cetera, et cetera. On nights where we have guest teachers, 2/3 of all the money we collect in the Dana Bowls outside is given to that guest teacher. So we encourage you to consider that. And thank you again for the teachings tonight, Patrice.